making it personal, something that matters to you, I think is the number one thing that all artists need to think about. And I find it sad sometimes when I'll go out with young artists and they'll be like, look at that, isn't that cool? You know, some old car, whatever it is. It might not be something interesting to me, but it is to them. And I'll say, well, you should paint that. And they're like, oh, but that's not really a subject galleries are looking for. And it's like, you can't talk yourself out of that, because if it's something you're passionate about, it will strike a chord in people.
Welcome to the BoldBrush Show, where we believe that fortune favors the bold. Brush. My name is Laura Orengo-Bear, and I'm your host. For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a podcast that covers art marketing techniques and all sorts of business tips specifically to help artists learn to better sell their work. We interview artists at all stages of their careers, as well as others who are in careers tied to the art world in order to hear their advice and insights. Before we begin, I'd like to make a quick announcement, and that is that this is the last episode of Season 5 before we take a 1-week season break. We will begin Season 6 on Tuesday, January 30th. And now, for today's episode, we sat down with Scott Burdick, a figurative painter based in North Carolina with a deep love of natural beauty, experimentation, and a fascination with storytelling, both in visual and written formats. In this episode, we discuss Scott's journey as an artist, his artistic process and how experimentation can lead you to new artistic processes, and why it's so important to follow your passion as an artist, not only for your own work, but also to help develop your artistic voice. We also talk about ways of supplementing your income as an artist, why living below your means is so important to producing great work without pressure, and the benefits of using social media, as well as the drawbacks. Finally, Scott tells us about his wonderful Patreon page that he shares with his lovely wife, Susan Lyon, as well as future online workshops and courses in the works. All right, well, welcome, Scott, to the BoldBrush Show. How are you today?
Well, great. It's so nice to talk to you, Laura.
Yeah, you too. You too. We've actually had a very engaging conversation before we started recording. But of course, we are now going to discuss other topics, and those are, of course, painting, marketing, and the creative act, which are things that we share in common and are frankly extremely important if you want to be a living artist. So I'm excited to dive into that with you. And also the fact that you are actually a multi-talented person in the sense that you are not just a painter, you're also a writer and a producer of very fascinating films. I recommend people go check them out if you're interested. But before we dive into that, can you tell us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, I am Scott Burdick, and I'm a painter. And like you said, I've always written since I was a kid, and painted, and occasionally I'll play. I went to film school after art school, and so I enjoy doing that as well. Although I haven't done too much with film. I worked briefly for DreamWorks for like three months, developing a project long ago, like 20, maybe 6 years ago. But really realized that wasn't really my interest in working for other people. So Sue and I moved to North Carolina, and we met through art school. We're both from Chicago. So, but I pursue all those things, painting and writing, and occasionally I make a documentary. And then, so yeah, it's to me, it's all kind of the same thing. So whether I make money at one or the other doesn't really matter to me. I just do the things that I find interesting, um, and that's kind of how I live it. And so as long as I'm making money from something, I'm happy, and it gives me enough money then to have freedom to pursue whatever type of art I want, or whatever type of writing or documentary or whatever. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that perspective. It's the less pressure you have on, being able to create something, the better it is. Because I mean, if you're working under pressure, it might, the things that you make might not be as authentic, right? And I feel like you have definitely held on to your authentic voice in all the mediums that you create in, which I think is amazing and such a life goal for me. So I admire that. But I also wanted to know, when, since you have so many different interests, when did you decide to pursue being an artist?
Well, I when I was a kid, I grew up. I spent a lot of time in hospitals, and so I was writing and drawing a lot. in the hospitals and then outside of them. I had severe club feet, and so I had many operations as a kid. I would have been crippled if I'd been born a little earlier, or if a doctor hadn't actually taken me on to actually do all these surgeries. And so
Mm.
I think it's partly that made me do so much drawing and reading and writing, because I even when I was home, I was on crutches a lot. I wasn't out, doing playing with the other kids in the neighborhood and stuff. And so I think that set me on the path. I didn't really like determine that I was going to be an artist until probably in the middle of high school. And so that was when I was writing a lot as well, and I applied for scholarships. And But they were only half scholarships for writing, and so nobody had gone to college in my family. And so my dad actually took me to the American Academy because a commercial artist he knew had gone there. And so as soon as I saw that school, um, uh, I was like, "That's what I want to do," because they had one scholarship a year for graduating high school seniors. And so I determined that was what I wanted to get. Even though everybody that I knew was kind of against that idea, my parents were supportive of it, partly because I wanted to drop out of high school and then go into art or writing or something like that. But
Mhm.
I had scored really high in science and math and stuff in high school. And so all the counselors were like, you can get a scholarship to a regular college. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something creative, writing or film or art. And so this one scholarship became my focus. Um, Even my senior year of high school, I was on crutches the whole year, still from operations and things. But I just went and used money from the jobs that I did as how they're saying I would go to on Saturdays. I would take the bus and the train downtown to that school, the academy, and I would take life drawing classes there. And then in the summer, I took it every day. And my parents were extremely excited about that because as my parents had said when I wanted to drop out, I was like, I want to just drop out and go to do these things on my own. And they said, well, you won't be eligible for the scholarship, at the academy if you drop out. So that kept me, because I knew I could test out of school and get my GED easily. And so that's kind of why I became an artist, because that school offered the scholarship. And doing all that extra work, drawing, that's how I did win the scholarship. So I got the full scholarship there, and then I would do commissions on my own to pay for while I was in school, to pay for art supplies and the bus fare and all that sort of stuff. So, and then after I got out of school and I started making a living as an artist, I went back and I continued to take film and writing at Columbia College in Chicago for 3 years, just half time, just those core classes. So, yeah.
Wow, that is
Sorry, a
very
long,
inspiring.
long answer to it. It's hard to say why you get into something, but a lot of it is just being in the right place at the right time. The
Mhm.
academy is a great school. It's not the same kind of school as when I went there, but Dan Gerhardt had just finished there, and Thomas Blackshear had gone there, and all these great artists, Richard Schmid had gone there, all these great artists had gone there. And as soon as I saw the work on the walls of past students, I knew that was where I wanted to go. We had looked at the Art Institute too, but it was just not at all anything like what I wanted to do. What had won the best student work was a gym shoe on the floor, and they had to put like things around it. So I was like, no, this isn't for me. So had I been somewhere else, I might not have had a good school like that. But they were still, even though they were illustration and commercial art mainly, they still had life drawing and oil painting. So I just took those
Mm.
classes. They didn't take illustration or any of the other classes. So yeah, so it was very much just happenstance of why I went
Yeah,
into painting as my living. Yeah.
it's so cool though. I mean, it's like you just went with the flow, you were like, oh, you're presented with these opportunities and you decide, wow, this is actually so fun. And I'm sure you had a knack for it too. And that also, keeps that motivation alive and that intrinsic motivation as well.
I don't even think it's a knack. I think it's just what you like. Because
Yeah.
when I started, even though I had done a lot of drawing from photos and things and comic books as a kid, when I started taking life drawing classes, I didn't know anything and they were so bad. And then over those 2 years, I got better and better by taking classes before then. In fact, the director of the school, Irving Shapiro, Mr. Parks, my teacher at the academy, who taught Dan Gerhardt and Thomas Blacksher, many great artists. Um, they would keep some of our first drawings, our first month, and you look at them then later, through the year to see how much you've come across. And so when I finished the academy, Mr. Shapiro asked if he could keep a couple of my first drawings that I did, and the ones I did when I finished there. And he would use those to show to high school students when they'd go around and give their talk on the school. And he said the students were just like, they're like, the person who did that did this when they finished, because people were like, he's like, oh, you gave all these high school kids hope. This idea that they have to already be great before they start school, because my first ones were so bad. All the high school students went, well, we're all better than that, but if you could do that, that would be great. And so I think a lot of it is just what you enjoy. If you enjoy it enough, you're going to put a lot of time and effort into it. And that was the same in school. We would go to the Palette and Chisel, Nancy Guzik and me and Rose Franson. A lot of us, we would go to the Palette and Chisel after school and paint there a full another 3-hour session, and on the weekends. And very few other students did that. But those that did all became great artists, even people who were much better than us in school. But so being so just passionate about it is what led to the skills. So that knack, the idea of like you're just naturally talented. It's like that whole 10,000 hours sorts of idea. I think that it's overstated. I think it's more about you're just you've got to go into something that you're really really passionate about, and then you'll get good. So don't think, oh, I'm not good, so I shouldn't go into this. It's really more about what you're inspired by. And if it takes you 3 years to get where it took somebody else 1 year, you'll get there. And then it's more about what you're going to say with your art or with your stories. That's really what matters the most. It's not this technical skill. The technical skill is important, but it's really more about, your desire to express something. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I am totally with you. Um, I just always assume, of course, that the person who becomes an artist usually has a knack for it and also that passion. But you make a very, very good point in stating that it doesn't matter. What matters is that you love it. And that's, oh, I think that's very inspiring, that you can start anywhere. And what matters is, putting that one step in front of the other just because you really, really love this thing. And I agree as well that, technique is important. And we were talking about this before we started recording, how technique can take you to a place, but then you have to take the technique somewhere else too. Like it's like a back and forth sort of situation, which is so important. Which brings me to want to ask you, what is your uh, creation process like from, let's say, from idea all the way to finished product?
Well, and that does vary a lot because when we were just in Rome, and so I did paintings from, on the spot. And when we go to places like India or Tibet or these sorts of places, you'll be gone for a month, and you will usually have a model pose in the morning from life, and then I'll go out and take photographs in the rest of the day, or I'll get up really early and take photographs, and those will become studio paintings. So the ones from life are they're a lot of my favorite things, and those are very direct. You're usually working 2 to 3 hours. And so then the process in a studio is very different. So it can be from photographs that I've taken, it can be from hiring a model for a longer period of time. Some of those I'll do sketches, I'll figure things out. I'm doing a big painting in the studio right now. That I had taken photographs of a model a while ago, and then I'm combining it with some pictures I took in Rome and in some of these churches, these icons, and it's kind of an idea. It's based on a Greek philosopher named Hypatia, and so it's a painting kind of that represents her, and so that is very much of an idea. And I spent a couple days sketching out and figuring out what I wanted to do with the composition. And then it's like a 40 by 60 painting, so I sketched it all out in charcoal first to get it all the way I wanted it to be, and now I'm starting to paint it. I painted the face yesterday, and I'm working on the background, and This particular one, I'm actually a lot of ones I'm doing. I'm taking photographs of it in progress for Susan's Patreon page to show, like, because we do a lot of these 3-hour paintings that you see that way of painting. Um, but then you do paint differently for these bigger ones. So it very much depends. And then some are I just start painting and I start with the abstract shapes. I've got about 10 paintings going right now in the studio in different stages. And so I'll let them dry, and then I might make something out of them. I might look for photographs to go with it, and those will kind of just evolve naturally. They're kind of experimental ones, and so it is very different. It depends on the painting, and yeah, I used to always paint for years. I would always only paint one thing until I finished it and then start another one.
Mhm.
And now I do a lot of experimenting. So I will have a whole bunch of different paintings and I'll take them out, I'll rework on them, I'll work on them again, and some don't work out. I'll completely just paint something new on top of them. So I've definitely evolved with that.
Yeah. How does that how has that affected your process though? Because I mean, I find it interesting that some of your paintings are very, very thought out and other paintings are more like fresh from your mind directly. Have you found that both processes feed each other in some way or help each other?
Yeah, they do. I would say a lot of my paintings tend to be more documentary type, where I go out and I find the subject, something that inspires me, and I paint it. Whereas, like
Mm.
lots of my friends, like Morgan Weisling and a lot of them, they have an idea, and then they get models and they photograph them for that specific picture.
Mhm.
So I tend to go and find something that I'm inspired with and turn it into things, and then so that's more it's almost like I'm interpreting it, but I'd say most of my paintings are that way where I now and I'll go and I'll get references or I'll have a model, we'll experiment and try different things, and so the idea comes from them. Uh, this painting that I'm doing now is a little different where I did kind of have an idea of what I wanted to do, and so then I looked through my photographs and found a photo that fit it. And then a lot of the other ones that in the last like 5 years, they are really experimental. So the fact that I don't know where it's going, or it's an old painting that I've done and I just am bored with it. And so then I just start painting over it again and just totally experimenting. So that's been helping, and that will come into the paintings that I'm doing, regularly. Some of these techniques that I'm trying different sorts of techniques and ways of interpreting things. So they do cross-pollinate each other. But a lot of it has to do with what your intention when you start something is. Your intention is to experiment, and then it'll go all different directions. Or your intention is to paint this particular person and try and capture what is about them. Um, so yeah, I don't know if I'm answering that well. So I'm not one of those people that have a specific, thing. It will change every single painting. I kind of will think about what I want to do, what I want to say about it, what's interesting, and then I'll try to in my own mind. I'll even be thinking about this a lot of times when I go for hikes. I'm really thinking about what is the best way to do this. Would it be better to do it thick? Would it be better to draw it out first? What color palette do I want to use to express the emotion that goes with this picture? So I
Mhm.
do a lot of that sort of planning in my head.
Right.
And then most of the
Yeah.
time it doesn't work out, and then I have to redo it. It's like it never seems to live up to what I had in my head, when I get to the
Yeah.
final paint.
Oh, I feel like that's a curse that we all face. The curse of I have this amazing idea, and then when you put it down, it's like it doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating how you just described, when you start a painting and you're just sitting there and you're in the what outcome do I want stage. That really reminds me of chaos theory and that, the end result is so dependent on a specific percentage of the initial conditions, right? Like the initial conditions will always determine the majority of the outcome. Which is why that intention is so important. And I like that you frame it in that way. I think that's very, very important.
That's the
And
biggest thing.
also, mhm.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and also the importance of experimenting. when when you reach a point where you feel like, okay, I already basically have technique. Like, where can I take this technique? How can I move it in a way that makes me feel moved and also creates an interesting image, you know?
That's one of my favorite things to do. We've done a few of them. We filmed few of these for the Patreon site that Susan started. Um, and I have all of these paintings in my rack so that we've done from life. And many of them are, like you're talking about, they're just kind of academic. They're practice and they're good representations. They're accurate and everything, but to me they're boring. It's like there's nothing really all that interesting. And I
Mhm.
love taking paintings like that and experimenting on them because they've dried for a long time. And so
Mhm.
we filmed a few of them for Patreon where and that's we just had somebody who was asking us about that. How can I experiment, learn how to paint thick or palette knife or anything like that? And it's difficult to do on a portrait or on a figure, something like that, that is very, there's a lot of drawing, there's a lot of,
Mhm.
accurate things. So if you're trying to experiment with thick paint or experiment with different techniques or ways of expressing things or outlining or all these different things, it's difficult to do it when you're painting from life because you put so much effort into trying to get things correct that you're afraid to screw things up. So
Mhm.
one thing that and I do this with my regular paintings as well. Um, you let it dry thoroughly, and then I will completely repaint the painting. And so we filmed a few of these on Patreon, and so it's fun because you can just like go crazy with your colors, trying different techniques. I mean, outline. I mean, do this or whatever. You can transform it. Um, and then if you don't like it, you can just wash it off with Gamsol. And then you've got your original painting there still. But you've already worked out your drawing and everything. So that way you can, you're not struggling with where do I place things or measure things. You're just
Mhm.
playing around with that. And I will
Yeah.
do that with even big paintings where I will, when I get to a certain point and I think, oh, I really would like to experiment a little bit with some of these things, but I'm like, but I put so much effort into drawing this out or getting this right, I'm afraid I'll just set it aside for a month and let it dry. And then I can paint over it and I can try those things that I had in mind. And then if they don't work out, I wash off. And a lot of times I'll do that and I'll wash off most everything except for a few of the things that worked. And then maybe I'll set that aside and I'll work on it again. So that's a good way um, to do that, to kind of free up yourself to be a little more experimental because it is difficult. I mean, I've done that where I start experimenting too much and I'm like, oh, I ruined this painting. It was so good at the beginning, and if you're working wet into wet, there's no back button.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I wish painting had an undo button, kinda like in Photoshop. You
Right.
just undo all the way
Exactly. Yeah.
back. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, and that's another great point, the idea of, you can get attached, right? You can get attached to your painting, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing, right? It's a good thing if it aligns with your outcome, and it's a bad thing if you want to take the painting further than you imagine, right? Because how can you go beyond if you're holding yourself back? Which I think that's why your experimenting is so cool and interesting. Having that fallback of okay, you already have the piece and it's safe underneath, and you can just play around with the top layer and you've lost nothing. It's very I think that's a very great way of working through that discomfort of what if this turns like shit, um, which oftentimes happens, especially if you're experimenting like a mad scientist, you put
Yeah.
stuff together
Yeah.
and it's like, it's gonna maybe work 50-50. I don't know.
Main thing is when you experiment is
Mhm.
if it doesn't work, you want to still have learned something from it. And so then it's not it's just like a scientist would say, a failed experiment means we know a little bit more. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the way I try to look at it. It's still depressing when things don't come out.
Yeah.
But I still do feel like, my teacher, Mr. Parks at the academy used to say when I was like, not liking something. I was like, this is terrible. I'm just going to start over. And he's like, oh, no, wait a minute. You're forgetting. This is your opportunity now. You've screwed it up. So you have nothing to lose. And now really screw it up. And I remind myself of that a lot of times, before I'm going to wash something off of work, even working from life. It's like, okay, it's not working. I'm about to wash it off. All right, I screwed it up. Let's really screw it up. And then I'll just completely do crazy things to it, and half the time I will wash the whole thing off, but that's okay. I got to experiment. But then sometimes you do that and something magical happens. And because you no longer have that fear of losing what you've got, you can actually just do something so surprising and interesting. And I've had some paintings that are my favorite paintings that happen that way. So so that's, I always remember that. My teacher would say, you screwed it up, now really screw it up before you wash it off. And it's kind of fun, and sometimes I'll
Mhm.
put it down, I'll just pour mineral spirits on it and see what happens, dab it down. You start to like learn these interesting techniques and you're like, oh, that actually looks kind of cool. And I can work a little bit more on it, but that's actually done something interesting to it. Or I'll just, take a squeegee and, and rub it this way or that way and abstract it more.
Mm.
And so those are opportunities. You got to think of some of those failures as opportunities, and it's a very important way to think about with painting. I think, at least for myself.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I also have like four paintings that I was working on simultaneously, and all of them were total experiments where like they start out one way and then I completely sandpaper them back. Um, I don't use poisonous paint, so I can actually sandpaper things back. Please do not sandpaper your paintings if you use lead or cadmium. Uh, but I sandpaper them back, and I'm like, "You know what? I kinda wanted to do this instead." And, like, I'll just, like, change the pose a little or, like, shift stuff around until I'm like, "You know what? I don't know. Maybe it is kinda working, but I wanna sandpaper this a little bit more." Like, and that's a technique that I learned from Odd, the using the sandpaper. I think it's such a wonderful technique because it creates such a particular effect, and that's kinda like how you were saying with the mineral spirits, it's like, what effects can I get from experimenting that I want to bring into my work that, if you never experimented, you would never push the boundaries of how far your work can go, which another very key important thing to consider. Especially when actually, especially when you're in the early stages too, when you're still finding your footing. Yes, have that technique down, but also don't get caught up in like boxing yourself into like one specific formula, which we were talking about earlier as well. Formula can be a crutch, you know?
Well, that's what's hard, when you're in school. When I went to school, the teachers set up the models for us, and Nancy Guzik and I and the different artists, Rose friends, we had life drawing in the morning and then oil painting in the afternoon, and then we go to the palette and chisel after school. Um, and it was just about trying to learn how to draw a nose to look like a nose or face to get their proportions. I mean, you really weren't expressing yourself that much. We were just
Mhm,
learning our vocabulary, what we were going to use to speak later. But there are some artists who never go beyond that. They just
mhm,
get caught into and it's a wonderful thing to just draw something beautifully or paint something beautifully. Um, but if you're not getting your own models, lighting them, finding your own subjects, um, we get lots of people ask us if they see some of the photographs. We on the Patreon too, we'll do photo sessions with models, and to show people how to use cameras, how to use lighting, all this sorts of stuff that you need. We didn't learn in school. I didn't even have a camera until I finished school. But those are things you have to learn. You have to get good at those aspects as well. But people will write and say, "Oh, can I buy photos from you? Because these are so beautiful." And I always feel like you're not thinking right, because you can get all kinds of great photos from the internet and stuff. And this is my viewpoint, because some people will take photos that from magazines or whatever, and then they'll transform them into completely their own thing. So that's totally different. But for me personally, once I got to that level where I was starting to get my basics down, that was where I was like, I'm so excited to go out and get my own subject matters. And some of the first things that I was most excited about painting was when I would go on these volunteer trips to built a orphanage in Mexico and volunteered at a refugee camp for El Salvador and Guatemalan refugees in Texas, and then in South Dakota, living with a family on the Navajo on the Lakota reservation. Those sorts of things. And then as soon as I started to travel, it was like art was an excuse to go to these places and discover things, and then to put them into my paintings to share them with other people, my viewpoint, but what I've learned from those people. And I feel like if it doesn't even have to be traveling far. I mean, just people that we meet around here, down the street from us. You know, painting all these people or in your yard, animals that you see, or your own animals or your own family. Those, I think, are the more important subject matters to paint, not just that, oh, this is a beautiful photograph that somebody else took. That personal experience, I think, is what art is about. I think it's what writing is about. When I first started writing in school, you know, so many the really good writers there were writing things that were their own experiences. And I had one of my short stories published when I was taking writing classes at Columbia College in an anthology book, and because it was a personal experience of myself. And so those are what's going to be valued more than your technique or anything. You need to get your technique, just like you need to get your writing skills up to tell your story, but making it personal, something that matters to you, I think is the number one thing that all artists need to think about. And I find it sad sometimes when I'll go out with young artists and they'll be like, look at that, isn't that cool? You know, some old car, whatever it is. It might not be something interesting to me, but it is to them. And I'll say, well, you should paint that. And they're like, oh, but that's not really a subject that galleries are looking for. And it's like, you can't talk yourself out of that, because if it's something you're passionate about, it will strike a chord in people. And that's something I think that is hard to teach. I We tend to just on Patreon mostly we'll talk about the inspirations that we have for things, but it's hard because everybody will have their own inspiration. And technical things are easier to teach because we can all agree on, you know,
Yeah.
what the values are and stuff. But anyways, I'm talking too much, but that's the most important thing to me.
You made some very good points, and I think, the whole idea of, "Oh, but the gallery wouldn't, like that," or, "Oh, but collectors don't care about that." It's like, who cares? Like, you're painting for yourself, right? You're painting I'm gonna say it, that it's a very selfish thing to paint. It's selfish in the sense of I want to put my inner world out there, right? I want to put my inner image out there. But at the same time, it's selfless because you're sharing it with everyone, right? But in its inception, the reason that you paint should be purely intrinsic motivation of I care about this so much that I want to immortalize it on a canvas.
Well, and when
Um,
you're painting one thing, it's easier to find one person that's going to react to it, you know. And I see artists talk themselves out of painting things that they actually love. They love children. They love flowers. They love beauty of nature. And they'll say, "Yeah, but I won't be considered an important artist if I do this. I've got to do something with a message or this or that." So both can be true, you know. Just
mhm,
because, you know, and so but that's what's great about like what Sue and I do is when you're doing an original painting, you can find one person who's going to like it. You just need to find the right place to sell your work. So if whatever you paint, you like classic cars, you're going to send it to a different place. So, or if you like comic books, then your art will be best sold this way, or whatever,
mhm,
graphic novels or fantasy art. So it's best to find the thing you're passionate about, then find the outlet. But
right.
it's easier with paintings if you're passionate about something to find that one person. You only need to find one person who has that same reaction to something as
Mhm,
you do. And so that's one of the reasons why I shied away from doing prints. We did some in the very beginning years ago, like 35 years ago. I did a couple and they did well for a print company, but then they're pretty much asking you, well, you got to pick a subject that is more, you know, widely that you can sell thousands of, not just one. And that's when I
right.
said, okay, this isn't for me because, you know, then it's in my head and I have to think about that. I will start to paint for that market. And so it depends on what your market is, but there's something out there for everybody. And
Mhm,
I find that when I used to teach workshops, that was the biggest obstacle was people, we still get lots of emails about that and saying, yeah, yeah, those are all great, but I need to make a living at this. And I understand that. And when I was in school and just after school, I did portrait commissions. I did whatever I needed to make money. But then I also had this part where I did what I wanted to do. And the goal was eventually to make a living off of that. So there's
right.
nothing wrong with painting things or doing commissions or whatever will pay the bills. But still, keep in mind those things that you are passionate about. Otherwise, you'll start to hate, you know, you'll hate being an artist. And nobody
Yes.
really goes into art to make a lot of money. I mean, it's not really the best plan. So if you get stuck in that, you're going to start to resent it,
Yep.
and you'll start to feel like, why didn't I just become an accountant or something, something that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, you just reminded me of something that Michael John Angel used to tell us. He used to say, if you want to be rich, there are a lot of other jobs you could do it at. Painting is probably not going to be the easiest one to do it in. Which again, that definitely it rings very true because, like you said, it's yes, you do have to make a living and you supplement income in some way, which I'm going to ask you about, of course. But you supplement income in some way. Maybe you have a day job. Maybe you have, like commissions, like you were doing. I mean, it's nice to work within the actual medium of your interest, right? And then on the side, remembering why you're even doing it in the first place, which is something that I think a lot of graduates of academies struggle with, especially when they leave the academy and they're like, okay, now what? I'm speaking for myself here, actually, but I'm pretty sure other people might resonate with that. But I did want to ask you, when you made that jump, from student to full time artist just living from your work. How was that like for you?
Well, I was at the academy and I assumed I was going to be an illustrator. And so it wasn't until Richard Schmid moved back to Chicago that I actually was opened up to the possibility that you could send things to galleries. And in fact, I won an award for the Society of Illustrators student competition. Even though I didn't take illustration, I liked NC Wyeth and Howard Pyle and those sorts of things. So I went out to New York when I won this award because it gave money, and all of the art directors there said the same thing. They said, your style of painting isn't really profitable anymore in illustration. It's all at that time transferring, into a different sort of thing. And they all were artists themselves. And they said, our advice is to go into galleries. You could sell your sort of paintings in galleries. But in New York and in Chicago, all the galleries were modern. Nothing was like what I was selling. So it wasn't until Richard Schmid moved back and we saw someone who was making a living as a fine artist that it was like, oh, right, okay. So then I took, when I finished the academy, the year after that, I had a show of a lot of paintings that I had been doing. Um, and I had a show and I made like $10,000, which way back then was a lot of money. And I was able
Yeah.
to, first time, move out of my house. I got an apartment. I got a junky old car. And so I started painting and selling in galleries. Uh, some in the Southwest, some in like little frame shops in Chicago. But after a year, I'd run out of money, and I moved back in with my parents. And then I started to make enough money to where I was able to soon. I got an apartment then in Rogers Park, and but I was still doing commissions, portrait commissions. Were always something I could make money at, and I started teaching a couple workshops here and there, and uh, but I started selling my paintings more and more. And so but even so, we were just going really month to month. And that was pretty much why we decided to move to North Carolina because Chicago was so expensive. And for both of us being artists. And so we drove down for 2 weeks and we bought a house in a rural area that needed a lot of work. The house did, and it lowered our expenses by half. So that's pretty much how but yeah, right out of school, I just started making money painting, and then I went to Columbia College and took classes there too. Um, but yeah, I was painting in commissions, and then once we moved to North Carolina, I was making enough money painting, and with the lower cost of our mortgage was half what our apartment rent was in Chicago. And so that was a major decision for us. We were like, we want to be able to travel and do these things. So we're like, we don't sell our work in Chicago anyways. So we're like, we need to live somewhere cheaper so that we can not have this pressure of having to make money. And so yeah, so then I was able to stop doing commissions and all of that and concentrate just on my own work. And yeah, so and then just little by little, your prices go up and you start making more money and so that's kind of how we did it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you bring up the same point that Sue brought up when I interviewed her about living below your means and how important that is, especially when you're starting out. You know, trying to really pinch those pennies because you're gonna need to buy paint, you're gonna need to buy materials, and they're not cheap. And doing what you can. I think those are all some of the best things that both of you have mentioned. At BoldBrush, we inspire artists to inspire the world because creating art creates magic, and the world is currently in desperate need of magic. BoldBrush provides artists with free art marketing, creativity, and business ideas and information. This show is an example. We also offer written resources, articles, and a free monthly art contest open to all visual artists. We believe that fortune favors the bold brush. And if you believe that too, sign up completely free at boldbrushshow.com. That's BoldBrush show.com. The BoldBrush Show is sponsored by FASO. Now more than ever, it's crucial to have a website when you're an artist, especially if you want to be a professional in your career. Thankfully, with our special link, faso.com/podcast, you can make that come true and also get over 50% off your first year on your artist website. Yes, that's basically the price of 12 lattes in 1 year, which I think is a really great deal considering that you get sleek and beautiful website templates that are also mobile friendly, e commerce, print on demand in certain countries, as well as access to our marketing center that has our brand new art marketing calendar. And the art marketing calendar is something that you won't get with our competitor. The art marketing calendar gives you day by day, step by step guides on what you should be doing today, right now, in order to get your artwork out there and seen by the right eyes so that you can make more sales this year. So, if you want to change your life and actually meet your sales goal this year, then start now by going to our special link, faso.com/podcast. That's FASO.com/podcast. And the other thing that I wanted to know was how have you since then how have you supplemented your income and what has been the best supplement, I guess, supplementary activity that you've taken since you become a full-time
Ah,
artist?
supplementing. Well, when I first started out, I don't teach workshops anymore, but I will do them online. We're going to do an online class next year, Sue and I together, and we do the Patreon. So that's kind of, but I stopped doing workshops, although Sue is doing them now. So she loves doing them. And I'll go with her and I just paint with the class. Um, but workshops were a good income. I would do a couple a year. Usually I would tie it in with a show. I would do one in Scottsdale. I used to do one at Scottsdale Art School, and Dan Gerhardt and I would have a show at the gallery that we were in Scottsdale. So I would tie it in with the show, and I would do one in Los Angeles each year, and in different places that I'd done. Clyde Aspavig he's a great landscape painter, and he had come to Chicago once, and he had told me that when I was first starting out. He said, "You should do workshops around the country. Don't do them in one place because." Then people will those people who take the class are really some great artists in that area, and they'll see your work, and so that was and they'll talk about you and buy your sketches and things, and so that was I think for starting out that was a very good advice because first one I did at Scottsdale, nobody knew who I was. In fact, they didn't need any teachers. I just said, if you ever have an opening or somebody has to cancel, maybe I'll come and teach a class. And so everybody took the class, maybe half full. Nobody had heard of me before. They just saw my painting in their brochure. And then those people got to know you. And then, over time, you would get known in different areas. And, I would have 100 people on the waiting list for the classes. So I think that's a very good way to get known is to do workshops at different places and things like that. As far as supplemental, really it was just painting for me mostly. I did one 3-month project for when we first moved to North Carolina for DreamWorks. All the artists from Los Angeles used to take my class from DreamWorks and Disney and all these different studios would take my Los Angeles class. And I had actually was thinking of stopping fine art because we'd had a couple galleries that had cheated me, and it was one in Carmel that had just happened to, and the artist came. So I went. They asked me to come to DreamWorks just to have a tour, but really they'd set up a meeting with Jeffrey Katzenberg. So he gave me the pitch to come work for them, And so I did 3 months in North Carolina, and I fly back once a month for the meetings. It was for a movie called Spirit. It was development on this movie called Spirit, which is about horses in the West. And it was interesting because it was a whole group of us. There was artists and there was a writer too. But all the artists, they were said you could write or do paintings or ideas, whatever you have, your ideas and stuff. And so I had always written a lot. So I actually sent paintings, but I also would write ideas for scenes and stuff because all they'd given us was a one paragraph, Jeffrey Katzberry, one paragraph idea for this. And so once I started writing things, the directors, Bruce and Lorna, they said, "Oh, well, keep painting, but concentrate on the writing things that you're doing." So I would send those in and come in once a month for the meetings, and they loved all the ideas that I would write for the story. So after 3 months, and they paid a ton for me at that time, it was a ton of money. They paid
Yeah.
$10,000 a month. So I made $30,000 in 3 months, and I used uh, a good portion of that to build a studio for Susan on our property. So she would have a nice studio and would be working in the living room. But then I was really at a crossroads because they wanted me to work there full time, but I'd have to move out to Los Angeles. So I'd mainly be working as a writer. And so we really debated it. We really thought about it. But I ended up just saying, no, I really don't want to work for somebody, work
Mhm.
on other projects. So I just that was the only kind of other thing that I made money from than painting. And I just kind of also realized I really do have it good. I can paint my own paintings, I can do my own writings and stuff. So that was kind of the only other job that I have had since then. And so for me, it's just been painting until and I would do workshops now and then. I'm trying to think if there's other things as far as money. Videos, we've done a few instructional videos. Lily Doll had come out years ago, so that made a little extra money. And then now with Sue, she started the Patreon site, which has been just it's just a wonderful, fun thing. And we've got like 150 videos on there now, and to me, that's more exciting to me because you'll get people from all over the world who watch them, and it's like I think it's like $9 a month, and you only have to do 1 month. So we'll
Yeah.
have people from very poor countries. They will write these really just heartfelt things because they'll say, "We've never been able to buy a video in the future." Maybe Sue's told you this already. I don't know, but and so they will write and say, "We've never been able to get a video because they're in Iran or they're in Africa or Afghanistan or wherever it is, India." And so they'll just get, because a video could be like our old videos were like $150,
Yeah.
when the companies would make it, and a DVD, and that's shipping and all that. So places like that, they could never get a video. And
Mhm.
so they can watch all the videos. They'll get all their friends together and they'll watch it for 1 month. And then they'll sign up again in another bunch of, another half a year. And so that's been really a neat thing. I mean, because there's probably like every month there's about maybe 50 of those people who will come on and then come off in 1 month. And then we have other
Mhm.
people, it's just wonderful because we couldn't do it with all the other people who will subscribe every month. And so that gives you enough money to spend the time videoing things, filming paintings, doing lessons, and then putting them on there. So so that's a little bit extra money, but it's really fun to be able to pass on these ideas more than just a workshop. Because most workshops, I was only able to do like a 3 hour demo,
Mhm.
and these you can actually do things that are like some paintings that take me a month. I can film them and photograph them. You can talk about all those, film, all these different things that we've not been able to teach before in a workshop. So and also just it's really expensive to take a workshop, to travel all the way to it for people, and so it's been pretty fun, but it is an extra. Sue does all the work on it, so but it's extra income for that as well. But mainly it's painting. Uh,
Mhm.
because both of us are artists, there's a lot of other things that we could do for income. A lot of
Mhm.
friends of ours, like Dan Gerhardt, a lot of other friends who they're either the husband or wife runs the business end of things, so they can make money from all kinds of different things, prints or books and stuff. But because we are both artists, we don't have as much time to do that other stuff. So it's mainly, for me, it's mainly just my paintings. And, and some, I make some
Right.
money from my books and things like that, but not. not enough to, make a living unless I were to do it full time and write for somebody.
Mhm. Wow.
I feel like the answers are way too long.
No, no, I love your answers though because I love that you really go through it. And I think that's so important because you know, you never know what someone's going to hear and be like, "Aha," like especially for our listeners. And I think definitely, first of all, actually, I'm going to fangirl for a second. I love Spirit. It's one of my
Oh, nice.
favorite movies as a kid. I was obsessed. I had like
Oh,
the little
cool. Yeah,
McDonald's like horses
right.
from Spirit. So awesome work. Great job.
Well,
Loved it.
I did very little, just in the beginning. They did development for a whole year on that, and then
Wow.
filming it took, another like 2 or 2.5 years. So, or doing all the animations. So those are the real artists who worked on that and writers. So yeah, yeah. But it was really fun experience to be you see into that
Yeah.
world and have a little bit of input into it. It
Yeah.
was neat.
Oh, I
Yeah.
loved it. I love that movie. And that also I love how that also brings up the point of when you're an artist, there are so many different directions you can go with what you know and what you can do. It isn't just, oh, I will make a painting and send it to a gallery. Like today, like there are so many different avenues that we can pursue with our skills. Whether it's the internet, like seeking out like I know a lot of people who make gorgeous like illustrative calendars and they just send those out and like there are so many different ways of profiting. Obviously, it's not easy, and obviously it is a lot easier if you have someone helping you manage like Dan Gerhardt's. But yeah, it's still wonderful that both you and Sue are so dedicated to not just creating your own work and continuing in your own careers with it, but also sharing what you already know, which I think I every single time I interview a person who's also a teacher, I love it because you're very open to providing all of the best advice, and I find that, passing it forward is so important, so thank you for that.
Oh yeah. Well, like we love doing that and having young artists come and paint, and we don't, they can just come and paint with us because it's just what other people did to us. Richard Schmidt,
Mhm.
our teachers, all those people, we can never repay them. So it is just passing it forward. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, do you have any other advice, for someone who is just starting out and maybe they want to find their artistic voice?
I don't, I, it's really difficult because you have to just follow what you're interested in. And it is being an artist, being a writer, all those sorts of things are very much something that's not guaranteed. So if I go to work for somebody, if I go to work for DreamWorks or other places, then it's more guaranteed. And people have different personalities. There are just incredible artists that work at the studios and different places, and some of them, that's just their passion. They love being given a project and to work on it, and then they do it and it's collaborative. So you have to kind of judge your own self. I just am not that kind of person. I really do like working on weird things, half of which don't sell, but enough sell. And so you have to look at your own self. Do I have the personality for this? Are you really driven to want to do your own things, or is it better to work for a place and then just not have that? Some people, the stress of having to come up with money. I mean, especially we don't have kids. You have kids, you have all the sorts of expenses. It can be very stressful. So maybe it's not right for you to have the stress of trying to make a living. We have people who come to us and say, well, I need to make this amount of money a year. How can I do that with being a painter? And sometimes you're just like, well, you're putting yourself under so much stress, that you're not going to be able to do your own work. Maybe it's better to do something else for your money and then do this for yourself, because that can be pretty stressful.
Mm.
So I think my best advice is taking the pressure off yourself however you can, whether it's another job and then do this part time. I mean, that's what I did with writing, or moving places if you can. Like we moved places to take the stress off us. I know that if I lived in a place that was very expensive and we had lots of kids and things like that, I probably would have to have done more things to just make money. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing, and even if I were to go work for films, I love, like you said, I love Spirit. I love those things. I would be happy working in places like that too. So
Mhm.
it's really hard to give specific advice. I think trying to make it so you don't have too much stress with that, put so much pressure on you, that's always going to be the death of creativity. So, yeah.
Wow. Very wise words. Very true. And actually, you're not the first person to tell me that. So it has to be true to some extent then, because I also feel that same way where if I feel like I have too much pressure and I feel like there's something hanging over me, I just blank out. I can't work under that. So it is very good to be able to take that pressure off. And yeah, there's absolutely no shame in having like a day job that supplements your income. Like, yeah, eventually maybe your work takes off and you can actually just live from your work. But if the pressure is too much, it's better to just, make sure you have that income coming in, especially now in these strange economic times.
Well, and it's not like a only this or that. So
Right.
just if you're not going to make a living at your painting, doesn't mean it's not worth doing then. I
Hmm.
mean, that's how I feel about with writing or when I make a documentary. I love writing for itself because I
Yeah.
learn. I create characters that have different viewpoints, and it forces me to research them and have these discussions. And so I enjoy that so much. It's not like, okay, I've decided I'm not going to do this for a living, so therefore there's no reason to do it. And if I went and did if I wasn't making enough money at painting and I went and worked full time writing for whatever place I was writing for, I would still do art.
Yeah.
I would feel that same freedom, that same joy in it. So I think it's difficult sometimes to separate the financial from the creative. And it's great if you can make a living at least one of the things that you are creative with, because then you're not having to. But I mean, some of the greatest writers, their stories or their paintings, some of the greatest painters even, their things came of jobs that they had that were just simply to make money as
Hmm.
loggers, as this, as that, or whatever. And that ended up to be their greatest contribution to art because they had this
Hmm.
experience. I mean, you think
Yeah.
of Herman Melville, going to sea as a whaler, and then that
Hmm.
became his masterpiece story. And it
Hmm.
was just originally done simply to make money. And so sometimes, if you go to a grocery store and that becomes, you paint something or write something from that. So, you can't separate life from your art is kind of what I would say. Don't compartmentalize them.
Yes. Wow. I love that. And also that also reminded me of Vermeer, because Vermeer was not an artist. He was a hobbyist. He was just
Right?
making those paintings for fun. And here we are with The Girl with the Pearl Earring as like one of the most famous paintings in the world.
Yeah.
So that's a very good point. Which also fun fact, he almost made his whole family go broke because he wanted to buy blue pigment and it was it was lapis lazuli, which was so expensive at the time. He bought it. Um, but yeah, that goes to show, it's like you don't it's not, it's not about the money. I think it never has been.
It, money is great
Yeah.
when you're getting paid for something that you want to do anyways. you know and oftentimes if it's something that you want to do anyways, it's going to be more unique. So because if
Uh-huh.
you just paint for the market, it's going to tend to become something that is just kind of a least common denominator thing that will be forgotten. It's not going to have that unique viewpoint that is what makes all really great art. And some obviously we can look at great artists who didn't make a living at it, and yet now we see their work because it's so unique to them.
Yeah. Yeah, like Van
Yeah,
Gogh, of course.
exactly.
It's a great example. But yeah, oh my gosh. I guess I have one more question for you because
Yeah.
oof, wow, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I wanted to know, how have you used social media to your advantage when it comes to selling your work?
Oh, and that's a good one too, because yeah, Sue kind of has gotten me into that. She had
Mhm.
gotten me an Instagram page several years back, which I she posted like a couple things for me in the beginning, and I didn't use it for like maybe 2 or 3 years. And she was funny because she's like, well, you've got 5,000 followers and you haven't even ever posted on this thing. So it wasn't really until she started doing like Patreon and stuff like that, that I had a reason to post on it. So I would do Facebook, and I liked Facebook because I like to have discussions about politics and religion and environmental things and all these different social issues that I care about and elections and stuff. So that I could have discussions with. But for Instagram, uh, I never really had used it. And so that has become very important for promoting like the Patreon site and for sharing your work. And so I kind of like doing it now. Sue sometimes still does post my things for me, but I will post things, and then we have links there to like the Patreon page, and we have links to Sue just kind of got us to get together and make a store so we can sell our sketches and studies and things like that. So we'll put them on and people can just order them directly because they're things that I wouldn't often take the time to frame and send out to a gallery. So people can just buy these studies and stuff. So that's, I think, how we're using it now is to promote a workshop Sue's doing, or to promote um, uh, paintings that are for sale, or a show that I'm going to be in. I just posted one because I'm going to be in a show in Los Angeles at a museum. And so I posted the painting and it lets people know that we'll be at the show. So I guess that's trying to think if there's other ways that I use it. That's mainly the way that I've been using it. Other people are using it way more than I am. I mean, it's really exciting to see all the things that, and we get to see people's paintings that we would never see. I wouldn't
Yeah,
probably have come across otherwise. Yeah.
that's very true. It is a great connector in that way, and also helps with inspiration. What are other people doing that I might have never seen before, and that might actually give me an idea. Um, but
Think it's a
I guess
danger
it's a
though. It can overwhelm you. And you
yes,
look at so many people who are, uh, I know with Suna, we try to, on our Patreon or when we do posts, we try to like explain too how, we don't sell everything and that things are a struggle and stuff. Because I think sometimes there's this idea that you- you've got to look successful. You've got to project this image of like being a famous, rich artist, doing all this sort of stuff. And we certainly, over years, have gotten to where we do get to travel a lot. We get to do all kinds of things like that. But it's still a lot of struggle. And I think sometimes you can get beat down by looking at all of this art, all of these so successful people they've gone through years of it and they got to that point. And it can kind of make you feel almost like, gee, why am I even doing this? And so
yeah,
you have to be careful, I think, with it. I think that you can also look at that and then start to think, okay, that's what sells. And so I've got to do that. I've got to do it like that person, like that person. It's good to take inspiration and
yeah,
learn from different people. Whenever anybody starts out, we're copying the people that we admire the most. And then you take a little from that, a little from this, a little from Feshin and Mancini and Sargent. You start to get your own style, but it can start to become almost like you're trying to follow the trends, and you're just trying to, copy this person or that person. So I think it is something you have to take in doses and be careful of.
100%. I agree. Yes. Definitely a double-edged sword.
Well, it
Um,
must be different for you because you're of a younger generation. So you
yeah.
grew up seeing your work from social media, right?
Yeah, mostly. Yeah. I mean, I'm 28, so I did partly grow up, without cell phone in my hands and without the internet in front of me all the time. But I did, once I hit like 21, that's when I was like, I guess Instagram is a thing and everyone seems to have an Instagram. And it was totally different then. But yeah, it is actually, I've seen studies where kids and people who have grown up with social media are actually more depressed. So I personally try to stay off for that reason. I try to stay off because I feel like, in a way, kind of, it can be a good thing, but it pollutes a little bit of my own. intrinsic motivation, which I feel like everyone has like a little voice inside of them that is telling them like what direction to go. And if you let all of these louder external voices take over, it's very hard to listen to your own inner voice. And that takes patience and a lot of quiet and a lot of isolation and separation, which is something that's very typical in the creative process for a lot of artists for a reason. So being connected all the time, I think, can be very detrimental, especially if you're just starting out, because it's very easy to be led on by other people's ideas and be like, oh, you know what? I like what that person did. I'm going to do that too. And that's fine. You can do that. But at the same time, it's like, is it authentic to yourself? And I feel like that's where the growing of an internal discernment is very important, where you really just have to ask yourself all the time, like, why am I attracted to this? Why do I like this? Or why am I actually trying to copy this? Do I actually care about it? Or is it because this person got 500,000 likes or something, or like you have to really depollute your mind from all of the external factors of attention and likes and follows. So personally, yeah, I stay off as much as I can. I just post. I comment on good work that I find beautiful by people that I admire or friends of mine. I reply to messages and then I am out. I am not in there very long.
Yeah, it's a balance to strike because yeah, I love seeing some great things that I'm inspired by, but yeah,
Hmm.
I think you're right. It's good to take breaks completely from it, and just focus on something that you have because it's easy to when you're focused on something to then get pulled this way or that way or second guess yourself. And so when I'm really into creating something, I love to just kind of isolate and not look at things and stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously looking at things is very important, but for that, I'd rather just look at Pinterest or Google Arts and Culture because there I could just look at old master paintings and look at them really deeply and be like, oh, you know what? I really like this color palette or I really like what they did here instead of just looking at my contemporaries because it's like if you're looking at your contemporaries and your contemporaries are looking in the past, then I think it's better to just be looking into the past, because you can get to the source, even though there really is no source because everyone's just a remix of everyone else. But I think it's as close as you can get to the source as possible is probably the best thing you could do for yourself as an artist.
yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, definitely.
Oh,
No,
thank you.
it's going to be
Thank you.
interesting to see what happens in the future, especially with
Yeah.
AI and all that. I've
Oh
talked
my
to so many
gosh.
people about that, and it's such a fascinating, new world that we're coming into. So it's pretty interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, I did want to ask you just on top because I didn't actually send you this question, but since you mentioned it, what is your personal opinion on AI art and how it's gonna change everything?
Well, you know, I look at AI art in a similar way to when I look at like working on a movie with a lot of people. Okay. So it's a collaboration. So you're always collaborating with, like you said, artists you've seen from the old masters in the past. Every painting is a collaboration with the people you studied with, your teachers, all the artists you've gone in the past. Okay. When I do a painting, I only will work from my own photographs or
Mhm.
from my own models. Now, some artists will hire photographers to take their pictures, or they'll buy the rights to paintings. And I know lots of artists do all these different sorts of ways of doing things. So when you buy someone else's photograph to work from, it's a collaboration. You're collaborating with that photographer. They went out, maybe you never even were in that location or saw that model or that bird or whatever. So it's a collaboration. So when you get into I see it that way as well. It's a collaboration. You're collaborating. Now, sometimes you're collaborating with people who haven't even given permission to have their photograph. And I've seen things where it's an awkward thing where somebody points out, well, that painting you did from the AI image, you've changed it and stuff, but that's actually a photograph that was on Vogue or something like that. So you don't even
Mhm.
know necessarily who you're collaborating with. So there's issues with that. But aside from the issue of of them using these different models, it's still always going to be a collaborative sort of a thing. So it depends on in your own mind. I think a lot of people are looking to AI as a shortcut to make a great work of art. It's always going to be easier to copy, to like do a master copy and do a great painting because they've
Hmm.
already done all the creative things. They've put it all together. So your copy, maybe if you change some of it from the master copy, maybe you're only a 5% collaborator,
Hmm.
and then 95% of it is somebody else's work. So to me, when I look at AI art, um, I mean, some of it is incredibly beautiful and great. Now, some of the artists, you look at their own work and it's not really very good. And some are better and some aren't. Some use the AI as starting point and they do all kinds of changes to it. So they're adding something. So they become maybe from being a 5% collaborator in the work, they were a 10% or a 15% or 50%. So that's often how I look at it is if you're just sitting there clicking things and AI is just picking things out of their things, they can come up with an absolutely gorgeous image. Is it really your art? Is it your personal viewpoint? Now, you are somewhat guiding it, so you have
Yeah.
some input into it. Um, you know, but so that's how I look at it. And I'm not really judging it and saying this is bad and this is good because Sue and I had this conversation before last year's Portrait Society because a bunch of artists had asked me to do a discussion on AI. And it was interesting to me because I learned about all kinds of different artists who are using it in different ways, not necessarily like they have an idea and they're using it to create compositions or and then they hire models for those compositions, all these different ways that they were using it. But the interesting thing was that Sue was very upset about AI. She was like, whenever I try to show her something, she's like, "Oh, that's AI. I don't like it," because it looked, you could tell it was. It had that kind of
Yeah.
uncanny valley effect sort of thing. And but then there was one like a week before, she showed me an image and she said, "Isn't this beautiful? This person's such a master, artist." And I looked at it, it was like girls on boats with like glowing spheres going up to the thing. And it's the artist I looked at and I said, but it looked like it was like a Waterhouse painting mixed with like Sargent or somebody like that. And
Hmm.
and she's like, this must have taken forever to do with all these figures and all this stuff and that great brushwork and everything. I said, oh well,
Yeah.
I hate to tell you that that's an AI artist. He's that,
Yep.
and I've seen his work, and yeah, there. If you swipe, you'll see 10 different versions of this. And she was so angry. She was like, "Oh my God, I'm unfollowing, I'm unliking this and everything." And I was like, "This is an interesting idea." Sue wasn't that interested in it, but we talked about it at the Porch Society. I said the idea of if the image itself is beautiful and you love it and you're inspired by it, does it matter how it was created? It's like
Hmm.
people who say you should never work from photographs, in
Right.
purists of like everything has to be done from life, it has to be done site size, all this sort of stuff. And I know lots of people who have that view, or you should only work from life. Um, and that becomes a process thing to me. It's like, okay, so you're limiting yourself and your subject matter because you won't use photographs. So it's an interesting thing. And like with that artist, he gets things from AI and then he'll do a little more work on it in Photoshop and stuff, but they're not as good as his regular paintings. So, like I said, it's a collaboration.
Yep.
How much of it is his? But there's no doubt that you can come up with beautiful work from it
Yeah.
and be inspired by it. For myself, art is about creating something for myself, even if it's not as good as Vermeer or as good as whoever else it is or an AI would do. It's I'm still going to create something from my own photographs or from life, my own experiences. I'm going to create something that is unique to me. Okay, so it's not something that AI would ever come up with after I do it. Now, paintings, Jeremy Lipkin was telling me that my name is in some of the prompts, as are his in some of these programs. Make it use this, they'll make a model
Yeah.
from all these different artists. And so that's fine. It doesn't really bother me. I don't really care because the next thing I do is going to be original. It's going to be my work, and it's going
Right.
to still a collaboration, but it's not going to be. I'm not only going to be putting 5% into it. It's going to be my. So the creative is what I care about, and so for me personally, I'll never use AI at all. Just like I will never use someone else's photographs. Not that
Hmm.
I think there's anything wrong with it. It's just that's just me. So again, a long-winded answer to your question, but I'm curious what
No,
you
it's
think
great.
about it. Coming out of the Florence Academy and working from life and all that sort of thing, they have
Well,
probably had those rules about only work from life and stuff, right?
I mean, at Angel Academy, it was very particular because actually, Michael John Angel was very much using pictures as demos. So that side, he never really had a position on it because he believed, the end result was very important. So he was much more open to it. But we did, of course, believe that the foundational technique stuff should be from life because,
I
I
agree
mean,
with that.
it's the basis
Yeah,
of
I
everything,
agree
right?
with
Yeah.
that completely. Yeah.
Uh, at GCA, it was absolutely no pictures, which again, if it is a foundational thing, then that's perfectly fine. Um, I personally, I feel like pictures are great because you can get poses that you wouldn't get from a live model because a live
Yeah.
model isn't going to be torturing themselves holding some ridiculous pose that's probably inhumanly possible to hold on to for very long. And the old masters mostly used sculptures to as reference for those poses, those complex poses, which I cannot imagine how the sculptors got these poor people to hold those poses. um, but even then, they're taking their references from something that's already pre-existing, kind of like photography. And even when photographs started, you know, getting more and more popular, Bouguereau used photographs for his paintings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And a few others too, they use photographs. Because I mean it saves time. The
Well,
bad
and you can
thing
get
when I
subjects, like you said, yeah, you can get
yeah,
subjects that you could never paint otherwise, yeah.
exactly.
I think
The
children's faces improved greatly when photography came out.
yes. Oh my god, yes. They didn't look like weird little homunculuses.
Yes,
But the downside to photography, which I think a lot of people, especially if you only learn from photography, it's hard to be able to see it, but you lose everything in the details. Like the photographs just wash out. The contrast is wrong. The camera has its own defects, right? The camera tends to do this to the picture. It
yeah,
tends to like push it. So yeah, you can pull it in Photoshop and correct the lens so that it's more natural looking. But you're still missing the beautiful color notes that are hidden, like underneath
yeah.
the eyes or like at the corner of the lips or like there are little things that get lost that you can only really get if you study an image or like a person from life, which I
Right.
think both practices
I agree.
are
I
brilliant.
think I was so happy that I basically painted for 5 years before I ever even had a camera. And I feel like that is so important. Even now, we always have models at least once or twice a week from life to do portraits. And when we go on trips for a whole month, you're painting from life. And I don't think I could do good studio work without that constant reminder of what things really look like, what values really look like, and
Yep.
yeah. But what about AI? I mean, your generation is growing up with that. What do you
Yeah.
see? You know a lot of other artists are using it. Have you tried it? What do you think?
Oh my gosh. Well, I did try it through someone else because I wasn't able to get on Midjourney, I think it was, because they had overloaded their system with the free users, and I just wanted to try it out. Because at that point we were going to interview Kevin Kelly. And of course, he has really interesting opinions on AI and AI art. So I wanted to give it a try, and I was able to do it through Clint's Midjourney because he uses Midjourney. And on the bright side, the idea that I had in my head that I was telling this Midjourney AI to create for me was nowhere near what I imagined. Right? I'm sure if I guided it more, I could eventually reach some semblance of the image in my head. But it gave me pause and hope that it could never replace my own vision and my own ideas. That's the one side. I have not used AI since then. I do sometimes use ChatGPT just to ask general questions though, because I think it's fascinating. But in terms of hearing other people use it, I do know Christopher Remmers mentioned that he used it, but only because since he's an imaginative realist, he wanted a glowing flower. And it's very hard to find a reference image in real life of a glowing flower. So he did use AI to come up with this specific image that he needed for a painting, which I think if you're an imaginative realist and you need a reference that literally does not exist in reality, I think it can be a very good tool, but that's the thing, it's a tool, it's not the end result. It's and as you said, a collaboration. So yeah, I personally I doubt I will use it unless it is for that purpose of imaginative realism, where it is absolutely a reference that I cannot find in reality. But I won't know, down the line, maybe,
Yeah.
but I am not inclined to using it at the moment.
Cool. That's interesting. Yeah, I find
Yeah,
it fascinating. The whole thing about where these things go, it's just so
yeah,
interesting to me. Yeah.
it is. Yeah, and I hope and I think that it's going to make, people see that handmade work, craftsmanship is gonna come back to the forefront because, for example, I am seeing a lot of, for example, artists that I've interviewed who now work with big studios like Marvel, Disney, or they sell oil paintings to these companies because it's such a niche thing. It's such a small section because everyone just went digital. So now there's like this revival of, "Oh my god, you're an oil painter? Who does that?" Like it's somewhat reviving, and I'm hoping AI can also push that revival a bit further on.
Yeah. No, I think it's very fascinating time to be an artist and alive. I find it that's why I love writing
Yes.
novels about that whole idea of what's coming in the future, and it's
Yeah,
fascinating to me to think about all the implications of it.
definitely. And we shall see. We shall see where things go. I mean, everything's gonna change. I'm just saying I'm thinking within the next 5 years because it's so exponential at this point.
Oh,
So we'll see. We'll see.
yeah.
So do you have any upcoming events or workshops, online workshops, for example, that you'd like to promote?
Let's see. We are going to be doing an online workshop in March, I believe it is, but don't quote me. Check our website out.
Mhm.
Sue has that set up, and that'll be a fun one. It'll be like 5 weeks, so it's one like 3 hour session 5 times, and she has all kinds of videos that people watch, and then there's the live portion where we'll be doing demos and working with people, and people will get all the same reference, so we can all talk about how to the technical things on that. What
Mhm.
else? I have a show out in Los Angeles at the Autry Museum. I sent a couple paintings for in February, then Prix de West in June, and what else to promote? Patreon. That's just patreon.com/Susan Lyon. And so that's the funnest thing that we have. I'm not doing workshops anymore. Sue has a workshop she's going to be doing for, I think that's already sold out though, but that'll be in England for rosemary brushes. And then we're going to just go through Scotland and paint. Uh, but I don't remember anything else. You can check out my books if you like them. We have links. I have links on my Facebook and Instagram to those novels. The first two are audiobooks as well, and the second one may be a movie. So we'll see.
Ooh,
Netflix is interested in making a movie out of Immortality Contract. So,
that's
and the
cool.
first one is all science fiction and philosophy and crazy stuff. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll include all the links also in the show notes so people can go check
Okay.
them out. Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Yeah. And then where can people find more of your work?
Just go to our website. Well, we don't post as much on the website, but on my Instagram page, I have some things on there. And then the website, which is through BoldBrush, which we love. We've been with them for a long time.
Mhm.
And so we love that. But so that's just, if you just go scottburdick.com or susanlyon.com, they go to the same place. So we've got paintings. The funnest thing is if you go on that is if you go in there to the menu and we've got the old travel journals. So we've got a lot of travel journals from, a month in Tibet and Nepal and a lot of different, maybe 10 different ones over the years. I haven't put any on recently in a while, but those are kind of fun. So I would write my journal and then we include pictures with it. That's kind of, I think, something I'd recommend people might enjoy. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. And then I know Susan also has a YouTube channel where she also posts some really
Yes.
awesome backstage sort of stuff from all the Portrait Society stuff and all the workshops. So,
He just
yeah.
did that with us in Rome. We were just in Rome for a couple weeks, and so we were going. She filmed the whole Vatican Museum and walking around, a whole bunch of interesting things. So it was pretty fun. Yeah,
Oh my God. Awesome. I'm going to have to go check that out.
yeah. No, she's really
Yeah.
good at that. Yeah.
She is. Oh, it's so entertaining too. Um, but yes, thank you so much, Scott, for your amazing advice and your company. This was fascinating.
Oh, thank you. It was really fun talking to you.
Yeah, you too.